gave that man everything. I gave him everything that I had.
From Vince McMahon to Scott Hall, Linda Hogan is finally breaking her silence on 10 wrestlers tied to everything surrounding Hulk Hogan's past crimes. And according to her, it's not looking good for any of them. She claims this story goes far beyond just Hulk Hogan. It's about the entire culture they were all part of behind the scenes. So, what exactly did these wrestlers do? Let's break it down. First on the list is the biggest name of them all, Vince McMahon, the man who built the WWF empire, the man who turned Hulk Hogan into a household name, and the man who, according to federal court records, became linked to one of the most infamous steroid distribution scandals in the history of American sports entertainment. Back in the 1980s, the WWF was exploding in popularity. Wrestlers were getting larger than life, with veins bulging from their necks and muscles stretching through their gear. Kids all across America wanted to grow up looking exactly like Hulk Hogan, but what those kids were never told was how Hogan achieved that physique. Years later, Hogan admitted under oath that roughly 75 to 80% of the WWF locker room during the 1980s was using steroids. He described it as fairly common, meaning this wasn't just a few isolated wrestlers, it was nearly the entire roster. And sitting at the top of that empire was Vince McMahon. According to court records, Hogan would reportedly call McMahon's executive secretary.
I watched the good guys get caught because they tried to pressure my alleged co-conspirator.
Vince McMahon came out of that trial swinging, blaming the tabloids, blaming the government, and blaming everyone except himself. And the man who helped make it all possible, Hulk Hogan, went right back to making millions. But steroids weren't the only thing Hogan and Vince McMahon shared. Back in 1986, Jesse the Body Ventura attempted to organize WWF wrestlers into a union. At the time, wrestlers were working exhausting schedules, performing hundreds of dates every year while destroying their bodies and becoming increasingly dependent on painkillers. Ventura believed they deserved protection, benefits, and a voice within the business. But according to Ventura, Hogan immediately went straight to Vince McMahon and exposed the entire plan. The union effort was crushed before it ever had a chance to begin. Ventura lost. The wrestlers lost. And Hogan protected his position at the top. If Vince McMahon was the enabler and mastermind of the 1980s wrestling boom, then Eric Bischoff carried that torch into the 1990s. By 1994, Hulk Hogan had become a free agent. The fallout from the WWF steroid scandal had damaged his image. His Hollywood career was beginning to stall, and Thunder in Paradise was nearing its end. Hogan needed a new opportunity, and Eric Bischoff, the executive vice president of WCW, was ready to hand him one. Bischoff reportedly offered Hogan a massive deal to join WCW, but Hogan wasn't only interested in money. He wanted something even more valuable: power, complete creative control over his character, full authority over his storylines, the ability to approve or reject ideas before they ever reached television, and no other wrestler in WCW had that level of control. Not Kevin Nash. Not Scott Hall. Those stars reportedly had what was called meaningful consultation, which essentially meant Bischoff would discuss creative plans with them before making decisions. But Hulk Hogan's contract was different. Only Hogan had full creative control, and Eric Bischoff gave it to him.
So if you're Hulk Hogan and you're coming in with all this success and you're sitting across from someone you don't know...
Eric Bischoff has defended that decision for decades. According to Bischoff, Hulk Hogan was still the biggest star in professional wrestling at the time. He argued that Hogan had earned the right to demand special treatment because he wasn't just another wrestler, he was a global brand. Bischoff also pointed out that Hogan owned the trademark to his own name, giving him leverage that very few performers in the industry had. From Bischoff's perspective, no businessman in their right mind would hand over that kind of value without demanding major protections in return. WCW gave Hogan exactly what he wanted: power, influence, and complete creative control over his career.
You're not going to do that, especially if you're smart. And especially if you're smart, you've got an even smarter attorney.
And Eric Bischoff wasn't finished yet. 2 years later, he helped orchestrate what many fans still consider the biggest storyline in professional wrestling history: Bash at the Beach 1996 in Daytona Beach, Florida. The center of it all were Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, the outsiders. For weeks, the duo had been teasing the arrival of a mysterious third man. Rumors spread everywhere. Fans were desperate to know who would complete the group. Nobody knew for sure. Not the announcers. Not the fans in attendance. According to wrestling lore, not even legendary commentator Bobby Heenan fully knew what was coming next. The mystery surrounding the third man had become one of the hottest angles the wrestling business had ever seen.
Bobby Heenan always hated Hulk Hogan. He always characterized or put Hulk Hogan in the worst possible context.
Then it happened. Hulk Hogan walked down to the ring, and the crowd erupted. Fans believed he was there to save WCW and stop Scott Hall and Kevin Nash once and for all. But instead, Hogan shocked the wrestling world. He dropped the leg on Randy Savage, and that moment, the New World Order, the NWO, was born for the first time in his career. Hulk Hogan turned heel, transforming from America's hero into Hollywood Hogan, the leader of wrestling's most infamous faction. The moment changed the industry forever, and WCW rode that momentum to dominate Monday Night Television for 83 consecutive weeks. But success came with a cost. Hogan's creative control meant he had...
Scott said, "Hey man," and he said, kayfabe, he goes, "I've been talking to Dally." He said, I'm leaving, man.
Kevin Nash has told the story many times over the years. According to Nash, Eric Bischoff flew out to his house in Arizona to personally pitch the entire idea for what would eventually become the NWO storyline. The two reportedly went out to a gentleman's club called Bourbon Street Circus, where they sat down for drinks while Bischoff explained the plan. And then came the bombshell. The mystery third man wasn't going to be another outsider from the WWF. It was going to be Hulk Hogan. At the time, the idea sounded almost impossible. Hogan had spent more than a decade as the ultimate good guy in professional wrestling, the red and yellow hero kids worshipped across America. Turning him into a villain was considered an enormous risk, but Bischoff believed it would change the business forever, and Kevin Nash immediately understood just how massive the angle could become.
He worked in Japan, and he was, at that point, it was going to either be, he could get Hogan to be the third person in a perfect world.
Kevin Nash was there for all of it. He was there when the NWO was built from the ground up. He witnessed the rise of Hollywood Hogan and watched as Hogan increasingly positioned himself at the center of nearly every major storyline. And according to Nash, he was also present during one of the biggest backstage shakeups in wrestling history, the night before WrestleMania X8, when plans for the event reportedly changed because of...
Scott hadn't drank for 16 weeks. We went up to Vince's room.
After reportedly staying sober for 16 weeks, Scott Hall walked out of that hotel room, stepped into an elevator, pressed the lobby button, and relapsed. According to Kevin Nash, Hall's sobriety collapsed that very night. Just 3 or 4 weeks later, Hall was gone from the company. Nash has openly blamed the backstage politics surrounding Hulk Hogan and the wrestling power structure for contributing to the situation. In his view, Hogan remained protected at the top while Scott Hall, already battling serious personal demons, ended up falling apart under the pressure. Nash has also claimed he witnessed the darker side of the wrestling business firsthand. He knew about the drug culture behind the scenes. He knew about the tensions, the egos, and the toxic environment that often surrounded the industry during that era. Nash even recalled that
Scott looked at Vince and goes.
Nash said Scott Hall didn't argue. He didn't explode. He simply stood up and walked out of Vince McMahon's suite without saying a word. But by the time they reached the elevator, Hall was already unraveling. According to Nash, Scott quietly turned to him and asked if it would be okay for him to drink the next day. Nash immediately tried to stop him. He told Hall not to let the situation break him. He told him not to give those guys the satisfaction of winning. But in Nash's eyes, the damage had already been done for Hall. That moment reportedly became another turning point in a long and painful battle with addiction, a battle that would follow him for years afterward.
He went down and broke his sobriety. He was gone, 3-4 weeks after that, tops?
Scott Hall was Hulk Hogan's on-screen brother. He was also his backstage ally, his business partner, and one of the closest figures inside the NWO's inner circle. But according to Kevin Nash, the environment surrounding Hogan, a world driven by politics, ego battles, and backstage power plays, ultimately had a destructive impact on Hall's life. Nash has publicly suggested that Hogan was part of the toxic dynamic that contributed to Scott Hall relapsing into alcohol use. And from Nash's perspective, Hall never fully recovered from that downward spiral. Then there was the Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior, real name Jim Hellwig, was often seen as Hogan's mirror image in the WWF, the same era, the same larger-than-life superhero persona, and a similarly extreme, heavily muscular physique. Behind the scenes, Warrior was even nicknamed the Anabolic Warrior by some in the locker room, a reference to the widespread steroid culture of that time. In 1990, at WrestleMania 6 in Toronto, Hogan and Warrior collided in what was promoted as the Ultimate Challenge. Hogan passed the torch by losing the WWF Championship to Warrior in a historic moment that fans still remember today, but behind the curtain, tensions were already present. Disputes over billing, pay, and ego were beginning to surface, and Warrior was also part of the same controversial locker room culture that surrounded many top stars of that era, including the alleged steroid pipeline tied to Dr. George Zahorian and the broader system that defined professional wrestling at the time.
What was the steroid use like at the time in the company?
Warrior described the culture in his own words years later.
I think a lot of guys, a lot of the guys use steroids, but it wasn't a thing like in the locker room.
Warrior described the culture in his own words years later.
When you took steroids, did your nuts get smaller?
After the cycle goes through a 6-week cycle and the synthetic wears off,
He described it as a private thing. In his later comments, Warrior said that wrestlers had prescriptions and that steroid use was something he chose as a mature adult. He often framed it as a personal decision rather than something imposed on him. However, the public record tells a more complicated story. Jim, the Ultimate Warrior, Hellwig was suspended and later fired by the WWF in 1992 after failing drug tests. That marked a major turning point in his career, and from that point on, he spent years trying to distance himself from the steroid controversy that followed him. Warrior and Hulk Hogan crossed paths again in WCW in 1998, but their rematch fell flat. Both men were no longer at their peak, and both—
He hit on my wife in his kitchen with his wife there. I mean, I don't think they were swapping, doing some weird
Roddy Piper wasn't just a Hulk Hogan rival. He was also a peer. He worked the same arenas, shared the same dressing rooms, and moved through the same wrestling system. Piper understood how the business functioned behind the curtain, and he was fully aware of how things operated in the industry's darker corners. Unlike Hogan, who often defended Vince McMahon and protected the image of the business, Piper was more willing to speak openly about what he saw. In his book In the Pit with Piper, he directly criticized Vince McMahon and, at least indirectly, pointed toward Hulk Hogan as part of the larger system that defined that era. On the back of his shirt, he even listed names of wrestlers who had passed away, including Art Barr, Rick Rude, Brian Pillman, Rick McGraw, Adrian Adonis, and Owen Hart, among others, as a stark reminder of the toll that wrestling had taken on its performers. For Piper, it wasn't just entertainment history. It was a record of loss. And in that story, Hulk Hogan's—
So basically, he said, Brutus, you're welcome, you can come over, but don't bring your wife.
According to Brutus Beefcake, the tension between him and Hulk Hogan didn't end in the ring. It carried into their personal lives as well. Beefcake claimed that, at one point, Hogan was at his Clearwater Beach home when an uncomfortable conversation took place in the kitchen. He alleged that Hogan openly discussed aspects of his personal bedroom life in front of both of their wives. Beefcake said the moment quickly became tense and inappropriate, and that his wife shut the situation down immediately. According to his account, she made it clear that she was there to see Terry Bollea, not Hulk Hogan, drawing a firm line between the man and the persona. That incident, as Beefcake has described it, added further strain to a friendship that had already been tested by fame, money, and years of overlapping careers in the wrestling industry.
My initial reaction next morning was, can they even do that?
Evidently.
Wow, WWE, they got state-of-the-art.
That was the end of the friendship. Beefcake had known Hogan for 5 decades. Over that time, he was around the steroid ordering culture, the The backstage politics, the creative control struggles, and the personal behavior that surrounded Hogan's rise and long career when Beefcake was finally inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2019. He later claimed that Hogan used the moment less as a tribute to their shared history and more as an opportunity to rehabilitate his own public image, rather than properly honor their decades-long friendship following Hulk Hogan's death in 2025. Tensions reportedly escalated further. Reports surfaced alleging that Beefcake's wife was removed from Hogan's private funeral in Clearwater, Florida after an altercation involving Linda Hogan. According to those accounts, words were exchanged and long-standing personal tensions between the families resurfaced in a highly emotional setting. Beefcake later denied being thrown out himself, but the incident underscored how
One of the reasons we're feeling so good is that we were right. This is the most important thing in the WCW right now.
The Gawker lawsuit ended with a $115 million jury verdict in Hulk Hogan's favor in 2016. It was later settled for approximately $31 million, and the case ultimately led to Gawker Media's bankruptcy. But while Hogan won the legal battle, the damage to his public image was already done. The fallout from the leaked footage and surrounding controversy reshaped how he was viewed outside the wrestling world. Bubba the Love Sponge was widely seen as the central figure in the situation, the man whose home, surveillance system, and personal circle were all tied to the incident that triggered it.
Stared, I felt kind of uncomfortable. So finally I didn't say anything to him, but I just kind of smirked. Like smiled, like, well, we're dark, so.
Randy Savage, according to many accounts, became increasingly consumed by jealousy and paranoia as tensions with Hulk Hogan escalated. On February 3, 1989, during an episode of The Main Event, Miss Elizabeth was injured at ringside. Hogan carried her backstage for medical attention, and Savage reacted with intense anger. He later accused Hogan of trying to overshadow him and of overstepping boundaries with Elizabeth. The storyline tension between them culminated in the Mega Powers Explode at WrestleMania V, where Hulk Hogan defeated Savage to regain the WWF Championship. Savage never fully let go of the resentment that followed. There were also reports of a heated confrontation during a European tour in Paris, where Savage allegedly came close to a physical altercation with Hogan over incidents involving Elizabeth. In frustration, Hogan himself later described an incident where he ripped a termite-damaged door off its hinges during the fallout. Years later, the symbolic weight of their history resurfaced when Hogan joined WCW.
He gave me like a death look, death stare, and he goes, brother, because wipe that smirk or whatever that is on your face off right now, he said, or I'll knock it off.
Hogan was furious and threatened to punch Luger right there.
I was like, I'm going to win the title? They go, yeah. On TV tonight? Like live TV? They go, yeah. I was like.
That was Hogan's way. Control through intimidation, control through the business. On August 4th, 1997, on the 100th episode of Monday Nitro, Luger pinned Hogan with the torture rack to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. It was supposed to be Luger's big moment, but he didn't find out until minutes before the match that he was going over. He held the title for just 5 days before dropping it back to Hogan at Road Wild 1997.